Hi everyone, my name is Trevor Vannatta, and I'm a PhD student in the Manchella lab at Purdue University. And today I want to tell you a little bit about what I study, which is how parasites change the world. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is what actually is a parasite. So all types of organisms can be parasites. There's parasitic insects, there's parasitic birds, there's even parasitic plants and mollusks that occur all over the world. And so a parasite is just an organism that lives on or in another organism, and it does harm to that organism. And there's a huge diversity. We think that somewhere between 50 and 80% of the species that exist on Earth are parasitic at some point in their life cycles. So it's sort of this parasites everywhere. For every organism that exists, there's almost always at least 1, 2, 4 parasites that infect that organism. So there's this entire hidden world out there that we're just kind of starting to wrap our heads around how important they might be. And one of the ways that parasites can be important is that they can kill organisms. So this is rinderpest in Africa. It swooped in and it knocked out a massive number of wildlife, of livestock and wildebeest and other things. And it had a huge impact on that entire ecosystem in the Serengeti. But there are other ways that parasites can impact the world, really. And so one way to think about this is what you do when you get sick. So when you get sick, you often avoid other people. You might lay on the couch all day. You might eat different food and things like that. And so animals do the same thing. They might avoid social groups. So they might avoid places where they could get sick. They change what they eat. And all different types of things. And so these, although they appear really simple on the surface, can have big impacts on entire ecosystems. And so one example of this is parasites that live in the intestine, these nematode worms that live in the intestines of cows and sheep. When cattle get some nematode worms, and when sheep get nematode worms, it actually increases the amount of methane that they release. So sheep burp out methane and cows fart out methane, and sheep that are infected with nematodes release 33% more methane than uninfected sheep, and they take longer to raise to a harvestable size. So what we have in this situation is where we have methane, which is 25 times more potent than CO2 as a greenhouse gas, is actually being increased by parasites. And so parasites may actually be influencing climate change, which is pretty wild. And so what I do here at Purdue is I've kind of have this idea that, well, animals impact nutrient cycling and ecosystems. All animals get parasites. So how are parasites impacting nutrient cycling? One of the ways that I do this is using math, which we're not really going to worry too much about here. But another thing that I do is I look at infected and uninfected snails, and I look at how much they eat and how much they poop. So in this case, we fed some snails some food. Infected snails up here in the orange, they eat more food than uninfected snails, they poop more than uninfected snails, and they're releasing more parasites than the uninfected snails are releasing eggs. So that's one way that parasites might impact nutrient cycling, is just how much poop is being put out into the world. Another thing that I do is I watch snails crawl around in containers to see what they do when they're attacked by parasites. So this snail here is shaking its shell to shake the parasites off. It's being attacked by parasites right now. And it does this shell shaking, which is really energy expensive. It takes some energy to shake your shell that much and try and get those parasites off. And so that's another way that parasites might impact how much that snail needs to eat and how much it can move around. And the last thing that I do is I actually build ecosystems. So this is a mesocosm tank. I've filled it with snails and parasites, and I measure how many plants there are in there and how much nutrients are in that entire ecosystem. And so that's just a little snippet of what I do for trying to figure out how parasites change the world.